Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who suddenly understand the importance of a divorce. Each month we spin the wheel and land on a different genre. Spies, mysteries, horror, romance, SF, it's all on the shelf. And right now we are reading spy thrillers.
The Looking Glass War by John le Carré, Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton, The Munich Dossier by Charles McCary, The Eye of the Needle by Ken Follett, and Diamonds Are Forever by Ian Fleming.
And this time it is Eye of the Needle by Ken Follett. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in piecing together with you why this is such a beloved book and maybe what parts of it we think really set it apart from other spy thrillers.
I'm Bob, and I'm interested in a similar question, Zach. I thought this was awesome, but I think lots of people will either say they hate Ken Follett or they love Ken Follett, and I'm interested not just in why people like or hate him, but what is the judgment that people then make about the fan or the hater of Ken Follett.
I think that's actually a great place to start because you said you think this is awesome, but people love it or hate it. What about the story did you love?
You know what I really loved? Some of the spy stuff in this is not as good as the other spy books that we've read, but what I think stands out is the romance and the kind of lack of romance. I think, you know how before we said that hard-boiled detective fiction was men's romance? I think we found the true king of men's romance. It's also very erotic, which I was surprised about. But I think the relationship between David Rose and Lucy Rose, we should talk more about them. But they are characters in kind of a tragic entanglement. Earlier you said, we've really learned the importance of divorce. But I loved these characters, and I loved the needle, getting involved in this romance and kind of mucking it up.
What really shocked me about this was the emotional dynamic, especially the needle, Faber getting involved between the relationship between David and Lucy. But it ties back to something I saw Ken Follett say in an interview, which was that he feels like in his stories, it's not about the action, it's not about the history, it's not about it's not about the narrative. What a good story is about at its heart is the emotional core of it. And with that in mind, I went into this book thinking, okay, what is the emotional core of each scene, each character? And I was shocked that time and time again, the one character who he took real pains to actually give a backstory to, or a full psyche to, or just anything that the reader can truly relate to, wasn't David or Lucy. It was Faber. It was the needle.
The needle. What a needling character. I'm going to beg to differ later about Lucy and David, but we can come to that. I think the needle is, right away, he's really hard to like. I think the first scene in this book is so gruesome, and right away, I don't like the needle. He's killed someone. We know that he believes in what he's doing. He's on the German side, and he believes in being a spy to find the information and transmit it to his side. But he kills so many people, and sometimes the people after him think that he's a serial killer, not a spy. He's an interesting character, but I just thought he was very evil. Did you think he was well-rounded? Why do you think he's kind of more soulful than the other? Not soulful. Why do you think he's more?
I might say soulful, honestly.
Okay.
I might say soulful. But I don't mean that in the sense of anyone else is bad. I mean that in the sense of no one else feels like a truly multi-dimensional character. I mean, there are people with trauma. So take David, for example, really just wants to fight in the war, but he loses his leg, so he's harboring resentment. That's different layers of a personality through trauma. But then there's someone like Lucy, who is kind of tempted away into, betraying her marriage, but that's through resentment, that's through loneliness, that's through, that is a multi-layered character on both ends. But in terms of morally ambiguous characters, which is something that like modern readers of modern novels or, TV shows, The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, everyone wants to see morally ambiguous characters. And I think that no one is truly morally ambiguous in this story except for Faber. Follett does this thing where we don't like him, we're repulsed by him, we don't agree with him, and we want him to lose, and yet we want to keep reading what he's going to do next.
I wonder if that makes a thriller. Whether or not you like the character, if you're afraid of what he's going to do next, or if he will make it, I wonder if that will keep you reading. I also was watching some interviews with Ken Follett, and he said, I need to have a plot twist every 3 or 4 pages. I thought this was very interesting too. He says in his writing, what do you call that? How he writes a book, he has 3 monitors. And so he looks at one, and that's his second draft, where he's writing the second draft. On the left, he has his first draft, and on the right, he has comments from different readers from that advanced reader copy. And then he rewrites it from the beginning. He says it takes him 3 years, 1 year for planning, 1 year for the first draft, and 1 year for the second draft. But he has to put in these plot twists. And I felt like Faber, I didn't really feel for him. I felt like he is the plot itself. And that's the motor for the story. And all of these other characters are affected by him. They get drawn in trying to stop him. I think he is morally ambiguous, especially when he comes up with this idea of falling in love with Lucy. He says, well, I can kill just about anybody because of what I believe in, as long as I'm stopping them from seeing my face or stopping my goal, just transmitting these secret documents. I can kill. But he starts to fall in love with Lucy, and he says, oh, if I were to kill her, it would be like killing a work of art. And he says he can't kill something aesthetic, something that is art. That is when I think he gets merely morally ambiguous. But he's an evil dude, Zach. He's an evil dude.
He's an evil dude. You know, I think as you were talking, it reminded me of a different character that we have encountered in the past of the show. And I think it's actually really helpful to compare Faber with Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. Because I think that both of them are doing the same thing functionally in their respective stories. They're agents of evil. They are supermen, you know, like I think like a dark James Bond. They can get out of any fight through using weapons that have a kind of brutal edge to them. In Anton Chigurh's case, that is a cattle prod for slaughtering cattle. And in this case, it's a stiletto that he keeps in his like up his sleeve that he then needles people, hence the name Dinedor. But my point being that when you compare them, you find that despite their surface level similarities, they actually have a lot that is so different between them. Anton Chigurh is a kind of nothing man. You know, he has no personality, he has no history, he has no emotions. He's the kind of person who, when he gets shot, he sits in the hotel room and just turns on the TV and watches it for hours without changing the channel because he's just waiting to recover. It's demonic. With Dinadel, with Faber, he is a person with a history. He has a lover back in Germany who he misses. He has a future. He wants to get home. This is his final job. He has desires. He finds himself becoming emotionally attached to Lucy in a way that he can't control. He recognizes that Eros has kind of taken over his rational function. So in that sense, I mean, Faber is something much more human, I guess I would say. He's much more of a literary character than just a pure evil killing machine.
I like this idea of these kind of ambiguous characters. Are they evil? Do they really want things? Is it for a greater good in their mind? But I think there's something beast-like, something demonic about these two characters, Anton Chigurh and Faber. Anton Chigurh is obsessed with fate. You know, when he goes in and he will decide whether or not to kill someone, he flips a coin and says, call it. And then they have to call if it's going to be heads or tails. He likes holding fate over other people. And as long as he gets to deliver death when he knows he should, he's okay. If it's out of his hands, he's going to lose it. Faber has an obsession with people seeing him. And that's a necessity because he's a spy. But it seems almost like an obsession sometimes. A German officer comes to give him information, and was ranked higher than Faber. Then he tells Faber, no, you've been gone so long, they've actually promoted you twice. You're ranked higher than me now. But I need to see your face so I can verify who you are before I give you this information. The transaction is done. This other spy has given Faber the information. He stilettos him, kills him right there, and as he's dying, says, "You saw my face." I think there's something that is a little bit broken about these characters. Yes, they have lots and lots of power. Yes, they're intellectually above a lot of the other characters in either book, but there's something very outside of common human experience that is a little bit demonic for these guys.
Demonic and even like neurotic taken to an extreme. Like I remember there's that moment where they publish a picture of his face in the newspaper, and he says something like, "My face, everyone knows my face." One of the things that really interested me was right before we hit record, I saw that there's a film adaptation with this, with Donald Sutherland playing Faber. I am gonna find that movie. That's really interesting. But one thing I noticed about that is that the trailer for the film version seems to take place entirely on the little island in Scotland.
Oh,
according to, it may not be the case with the actual film, but for the trailer, what the trailer reduces the story down to, what the producers felt like the core of the story was a man and a wife on an island, and a stranger comes to town, seduces the wife, and kills the husband. And it's funny that that's how they present the core of this story. Because myself as a reader, as much as I loved the first 30-something chapters of this book, I got the feeling near the end that the core of this book is everything that happens on Scotland. And everything before that is just a preamble, just a character dump, a 29-page character dump, so that you truly feel the stakes of what happens in that almost like horror. It's almost a horror novel, really, but just right at the end.
Just right at the end. I completely agree with this director's decision. I think it's the most interesting to me when they're on Aberdeen, they're on that island. It's described as, "It is for places like this that the word bleak has been invented," says Ken Follett. And it's always misty, always cold. There's only two little houses there. There's where the shepherd lives, and then there's where the Roses, David and Lucy, where they live. I think that was really interesting to me. Like you said, they both live with some kind of resentment, but they're still trying to get by. They have a son. It reminded me actually of two other books that we've read before, kind of mashed up together. Shane, where the really cool cowboy comes in town, and the father kind of knows that his wife has fallen in love with Shane and almost gives the nod to say, "Okay, I know I'm not as good as you, but please don't take my life away." This happens, the same moment kind of happens here between this love triangle of David, Lucy, and Faber. But it also becomes, like you said, horror. It is very, very similar to The Shining. Okay. It is almost like shot for shot the same as The Shining. I think that makes for a great movie. And I think Ken Follett knows that when he's writing. He wants you to feel like you're immersed in a movie.
Two moments that stuck out to me as particularly Shining-esque, or even I'll even just say 80s horror film-esque, was Faber reaching in through the windowsill and her taking the axe and swinging it. And she's like, "He pulled his hand away and I missed it until I heard him scream." And two bloody fingers dropped down below where the axe had struck. But then also when she releases the dog on him.
Oh, yeah.
And there's the barking, and there's him fighting the dog, and then it goes silent. And then suddenly something breaks the window and comes crashing through. And what is it? It's the dead dog. Just like, oh my God. He would be, he would be an incredible horror writer if he let himself go in that direction fully without reservation.
Yeah, that's when I was completely locked into the story. There is some stuff that feels a little bit like maybe it should be cut. I don't know. But I think he really can lock in the reader. That brings me to something I'm really curious to ask you, and I really want to know your opinion. Because again, I think if you see someone with a Ken Follett novel on their lap, you know they're either getting on a plane and just trying to pass time, or they're not that serious about books. I feel like if I tell someone I'm reading Ken Follett, they're going to go, oh. And I don't think that's fair.
I don't personally know too many people who are big Ken Follett fans, but the people who I do I think I would not characterize them as not serious about books. In fact, I would say that they're the kind of people who have read more books in their lifetime than 95% of people. And yet, and yet, somehow their taste in books never seems to quite overlap with mine, which is fine. But my point being, the Ken Follett reader is very much a type. And I'm not quite sure if I have it in me quite yet to wrap my mind around exactly how I would characterize this type, who this person is, and what they want from their books.
I think yes, Ken Follett readers are people who read a lot of books, but I think what someone would say is, oh, those aren't real books. They're not challenging or something like that. But let me throw this one at you and see, would you read this? 1989, it comes out. It's about building a cathedral, and it covers the time of the sinking of the White Ship, the murder of Thomas Becket, but primarily focuses on the anarchy and the development of Gothic architecture from Romanesque architecture. Would you read that?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. It doesn't sound that intriguing.
What? What? It sounds so cool.
Bob, I think
very
you might
shocked.
be a Ken Follett reader.
Zach.
I think you might be a Ken Follett reader, and I might not be a Ken Follett reader, but that's okay. That's okay.
I'll start my own Ken Follett show.
Yeah, if you want to read it together, then by God, I will join you down that dark path. But
sounds incredible. Sounds incredible. 12th century. Okay.
I think that historical fiction is really at the core of what Ken Follett does. And even though this is a espionage thriller novel, the way that the story is initially framed in the prologue, I want to say, where he basically says, like, we know X happened, we know Y happened.
Right.
Therefore, something like what happened in the following pages must have happened, or something like that, or you can imagine. I think that opening page did a lot of work in pre-selling this book to a very specific type of reader. People who know a lot about the history and say, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about, and this is a good premise for someone to let their imagination run wild.
People who really care about the authenticity of the research. I think it's a big thing for Tom Clancy too. There's so much research that goes into these books that people like that. They like I'm learning something while I'm reading. It's very appealing. If you could guess who his two favorite authors are, who do you think they would be? Ken Follett's two favorite authors, who he says inspire him the most too.
Inspire him. Okay. I think the attention to detail here really reminds me of someone like Hilary Mantel, but that I don't think in 1989 that would be Ken Follett's favorite author. But what I do think he probably was reading, at least from childhood onward, is probably someone like Ian Fleming, James Bond.
100 points. He loves Ian Fleming. I thought this was cool too, because he said, I really want people to feel like I did when I had the new Ian Fleming book in my hands. So he said that was thrilling to get all of the new Ian Fleming books and read them as soon as they came out. But his other favorite, Shakespeare. Number 3, though, I thought this was cool. 2, Jane Austen. And he says he rereads the Jane Austen books again and again and again because he says that is what a novel should be, and I want to make something like that. I thought that was cool. Here's 2 other things, because I have a big question for you again, but 2 other things. He says, okay, the best first line ever in a book is from Roald Dahl, James and the Giant Peach. James Trotter was a happy child until he was 4. But he says, but, he says the worst line ever is from Proust. For a long time, I used to go to bed earlier.
You sold me on Proust right there. We got to read Proust.
But then my question is it my responsibility? I thought this was a great book. I thought it was a lot of fun. But is it my responsibility to hate it?
Ooh, what a question. Is it your responsibility to hate it? Well, I can answer the only way that I can, which is from the perspective of someone who read it but didn't love it, didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. And the only reason I didn't love it is because I didn't think it was as fun as it could have been. And when you say that his biggest influences are people like Ian Fleming, or he's name dropping Roald Dahl as having the greatest opening line ever.
That's great.
These are all authors who are extraordinarily fun to read. And for me, I found this book intellectually interesting to read for much of it. However, it was only fun to read for the climax of the book. Now, what I want to know is, if you were to play devil's advocate, what is your case for hating this book?
Here's what I think. Earlier, I mentioned his writing process with the 3 monitors, right? And on the furthest right, the right monitor is all people's comments. And so what he will do is he looks at it and says, oh, well, the reader, the consumer, one might say, the reader doesn't like this. I need to trim it out. I'm pondering too much. I need to make this full of more action to get them to be entertained, to get them to keep turning pages. Now, when we read the hard-boiled stuff, when we were reading Mickey Spillane alongside Raymond Chandler, we noticed that people just hate Mickey Spillane and they love Raymond Chandler. However, it seems Mickey Spillane is often a little, at least on par with Raymond Chandler, or sometimes a little higher quality as he continues to write. But in all of his interviews, he was saying, like, look, I'm writing these to make a lot of money. I turn them out to burn them out. You know, he's about the system of making money. And maybe that wasn't exactly true. He was just downplaying his books a little bit to joke around. However, that is what we have, and that is our impression of Mickey Spillane. Whereas Raymond Chandler said, look, Dashiell Hammett and I are doing art. We are taking this trope of detective fiction and we are doing art with it. And I think when Ken Follett is trying to please the readers so much, and that is his whole plan, I wonder if that diminishes our perception of him as an artist. We don't think he's writing a book. We think he's churning something out to make a profit and getting us to be entertained by something that is formulaically entertaining.
I think that characterizing him as an artist is fair. I myself see him as a craftsman, and I mean that positively, but I think that your illumination that he writes with 3 computer monitors open,
literally illuminating, yes.
Oh, yeah. is really just an example of this. But, you know, one thing I pointed out, or one thing as I was reading this and taking notes, I was saying to myself, there's so many scenes in here where I'm just like, man, it's just going off. Like, man, like he didn't have to include this. And the one scene that I pulled aside, the first one that I pulled out, was when they go to Bloggs' house. And there's all this thing about how him and his wife don't have kids yet. They don't want to have kids while the world is in this state. And his wife, you know, she means well, but she keeps burning the sausages. You know, they eat, and it's the worst sausages that Professor Godlyman has ever had in his life. And I'm just like, why did we have this scene? Why did you write this chapter? What is this doing? It wasn't until I went back later at the end, as I was prepping my notes for this show, that I recognized that scene is there just so that he can kill the wife, and that you feel good at the end when he marries Lucy. And it's just like, he's playing the long game. You know what I mean? Like, it's some of these scenes can be such a, they're not enjoyable to read in the moment, but it's afterwards, intellectually, you look back on it and you feel rewarded because you're like, oh, this is crafted. And some people love that. But me, let me put it this way. Some people like steak. I'm a man who likes candy.
I like steak a lot more than I'm not sure. I'll take a steak and then a candy after the steak.
Can we put candy on the steak?
That's awful. That's oh, it's like when the Gilmore Girls, when they made sushi out of candy.
Oh my God.
If you've ever, never mind. So, okay. Yeah, maybe it is a little bit more fluff. You know, like some of the stuff could be ditched a little bit. I still think that the character of Lucy is quite interesting. I think she is a badass at the end, having to survive and then kill the Needle, pushing him off the cliff, just like Lord of the Flies. But one thing that was different, at least I haven't seen it in the other spy books, or it hasn't been so emphasized. Earlier, you were saying you really liked the character of the Needle, and I was suggesting it kind of is the motor of the plot. I think the Needle as a spy is interesting because in World War II, it's all about getting to the radio to send the signal. It's the same as we saw in the Looking Glass War, but this time the Needle has to travel because he contains all of the important information, and he is the last one, the only one to contain that information. And if he's dead, the whole mission is completely dead and all the information is gone. I thought that was quite interesting, and it reminded me a little bit of Fahrenheit 451, where these people are responsible for, a whole tome of a book. They've memorized it. The Needle, he has these negatives, these pictures, attached to his chest. But my attachment to him was this idea of this information being lost forever. Good if it's lost forever, because he's trying to help Nazi Germany at the time. But a spy who has to keep himself alive to keep the information alive, and then also has to kill anyone who sees him. I think that was pretty interesting. Information is very important to a spy, and it's attached to their body.
That's a good point, but I think there's one element of this that I think we haven't really touched upon yet, which is, we're talking about him as a spy, and he is the spy of the book, but he's also the antagonist. Really, from a protagonist perspective, this isn't a spy novel. This is a catch-a-spy novel. This is almost, dare I say, a crime fiction novel. This is a detective novel where the killer is on the run, and they got to go from place to place to track him.
That's very true. It is very much a mystery, not a whodunit. I guess for some of the characters we get attached to, it is a whodunit because they don't know it's the Needle. Just we know it's the Needle. And they're trying to follow all of these bodies. And as they get this, these clues of the little needle injury that has killed someone, that is the wound from his knife, it is very much a mystery. And they even apprehend the wrong person. I think Percival Godleman and Frederick Bloggs, when they're going, I think Bloggs is the guy who beats up another suspect because he kind of matches the description of Faber, and he is almost accused and put in jail because of this similarity. And the way that these detectives, they work for MI5, and they're kind of working to do it's in wartime, so they are doing spy work, but they are acting like detectives, hunting him down, first by train station, then following clues to the island, listening for the SOS, showing up at the island. It is following a trail of clues to apprehend someone who they know is a murderer and who also might have very delicate information.
Well, Percival Godleman also functions as a kind of amateur sleuth. To take the circuitous way around this and call back to a few episodes previous, we've talked about how the kind of vocation of the detective oftentimes determines how they solve the crime. That could be Father Brown being a Catholic priest and using that kind of knowledge of the human soul to catch the criminal. When Smiley was in the detective novel A Murder of Quality, he used his capabilities as a spy in order to solve the crime. Here, Godleman is a historian, and he relates this moment where when he was a student, he's tracing the life of this person, but there's 8 months he couldn't account for. And he knew that person was somewhere during those 8 months of his lifetime, but all the primary records didn't have it. And it wasn't until he went completely out of his way to go search through some obscure archive, he finally found the information he was looking for. And that discovery is what earned him his professorship. And then it says he might try applying that kind of thinking to the problem of what had happened to Faber. So at his heart, he's a historian detective.
So cool.
I don't have too much more to say about this book, but there is one point I want to bring up and ask your opinion on. And I think it's especially salient because you mentioned him talking about loving Roald Dahl, which is like Roald Dahl. I don't know if you noticed this, but so many of the characters have extremely apt names. Actually, the technical word for this is aptonym, where the name describes the character. So Faber is like the German word for, well, fabrication comes from it, something constructed. He's a spy. He's under a false identity. He is fabricated. He's Faber. I don't even need to break down Professor Godly Man. What did you think about this?
I can't think of any other examples. Let me.
I'm not sure there was any other examples, but those two, I was like,
It makes me think of the old trope that we've seen in some of the hardboiled detective fiction, like in Maltese Falcon, where there is Gutman. He's a big guy. Effie is kind of an ephemeral character. And then, what's the other guy's name? The guy who always talks like, Sam Spade. He's always digging up the truth. And, Joel Cairo. The only foreign characters, they just called him Cairo. Yeah, it made me think of that a little bit.
Well, I'm glad to, at least this book got me to actually look up the name for this phenomenon, aptonym, which I think is such a cool word.
No, it sounds like an apto name.
Yeah, it is. It's a very apto name indeed.
Yes.
We have one more book in our espionage thriller section, and it is a book that I am so glad to be coming home to. Diamonds Are Forever by Ian Fleming. They say you should end every meal with dessert, and I think that we have done that this time.
Ling Ling Chi. Oh, man.
All right. Well, I will talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.